Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aggie Mikulski. I'm the interim president of Alberta, and delighted that you can join us for our speaker series. Since 1998, Alberta has been the life sciences industry's central voice and coordinating hub. And our role is to promote and advocate for our members, and all of our programs include speaker series, educational, promotional, networking opportunities, as well as working with government to offer funding and development programs. So many things are changing in our industry and our province, and so we are taking the steps to promote our industry in a time of change, and it's a time of opportunity. So do please get engaged with us. We'll be reaching out to you and also to all of our members and companies that even aren't members but are in the industry. There's a State of the Industry survey that we're encouraging you all to fill out. It's an important piece of knowing how our industry is emerging and what are statistics, and it will help us to promote and advocate for the industry. And a big thank you to our title sponsor for sponsoring this event, Norton Rose, and also to all of our partners that make a lot of our programs possible, and to our members for engaging with us. And as I said, today's speaker series, like others, are meant to get you to network and learn something more about some of the programs that are being offered. And without further ado, I will ask Dr. Jackie Shan to do the introduction. She's one of our board members and a successful entrepreneur. And she can actually speak from the heart in terms of what it means to have supportive programs and funding agencies that make the development possible. Jackie?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, and Aggie, and allow me to have this honor to introduce our speakers today, and Dr. Raymont. And I think most of us know Dr. Raymont, and as a CEO and the president for AVAC, and one of the very few investment venture investors in our province, and empowering and technology innovation and commercialization. So we, and my own company in the past and the current company, and has been empowered and by the investment and the help from AVAC. So, but today is not my speech today, and I'm just introducing Dr. Mycogen. So apart from the AVAC role and Dr. Raymont actually, and being very well known internationally as a leader in the innovation commercialization and many business and internationally. So, and I don't want to miss any highlights, so I'm just going to read this and for Dr. Raymont's distinguished career. So, Michael is the president, the CEO, and director of AVAC, we all know, and the managing and the funding partner of a new venture investor and called Vertex in Canada. So both organizations are Canada-based and venture investors emphasizing all aspects of the agriculture and the food sectors, with the exception of the land. So AVAC also managing a portfolio of funds of fund investments, and the accelerated angel co-investment fund. So Dr. Raymont is also the chairman of Borderline Asia and a director of an AVAC Investment LLC, and both of which provide investment funding and financial advisory work in Asia. So formally, and Michael served as a president and also the deputy minister for NRC. And prior to this, and Dr. Raymont was CEO of 3 growth businesses in Canada and the US. Before which, Michael was the CEO of the venture capital US and the international subsidiaries of Telus Corporation. Wow. So Michael has presented widely and on the innovation, technology, commercialization, sustainability, in the food, agriculture, and energy. So he has extensive international experience, having lived for many years in the US, East Asia, and Europe. So he has been a director since 1974 in many businesses in private sectors and also in public sectors. So without any ado, and then may I present him, Dr. Raymont.
Thank you, Jackie, for that perhaps overly meritorious introduction, but I hope I live up to it. I also feel with that long an introduction, I should also have a big long white beard, but I am a little older than I look, and I put it down to actually an interesting meal. I'm not going to call it a diet, I'm going to call it a meal or an intake issue. So I'm actually working on something which is low carb and involves a relatively small amount of incredibly high intensity exercise, very short durations, and very high intensity weight training, very, very high loads for short durations. And the diet, I take in less than 100 grams of carbs a day, not much less, just right around 100, and basically as much meat and vegetables as I want. Now, why do I say that? Well, because I just got off a plane from New York about a few days ago. Before that, I was in Asia, and so on and so forth. I have sort of almost as bad a travel schedule as Jackie, so we'll see how it works, because if I can stay awake and you can stay awake, we've succeeded in the diet works. Anyway, I want to talk today about innovation in agriculture, and the title there says optional or an imperative. And I will argue today that it's an imperative, and this is why. Because, and it says it pretty simply, by 2050 we're going to have 9.6 billion people in the world, plus or minus a tenth of a billion or so. And diets are changing in places, particularly developing countries, demanding more dairy and more meat protein. And in total, given the increase in the world's population, we're going to require something like 70% more calories than are produced in the world today. So you say, well, okay, let's cut down a little bit more rainforest, or do something else, or plant some more acres, and we can grow some more food. Well, that all sounds fine, but I'll tell you that, and this is a little hard to read, I'm sure, from the back of the room, but the red line represents the global population, which is going up there from 1970 here up to 2030 in this case. And the green line represents the amount of arable farmland per capita. So the point is that there is only a limited amount of good arable land in the world, and basically we're using it all today. So if you do go down and chop down a rainforest, first of all, the World whatever foundation is going to be after you for this, that, and the next thing. It's not a good idea. I'm not advocating it at all. But secondly, the soil you'll find underneath there is extremely poor quality. It's just not suitable for the kind of agriculture we conduct today. So experts vary as to whether arable land is actually decreasing because of things like desertification, urbanization, and so on and so forth, and overuse, frankly, of that land, or whether there might be some marginal increases in the amount of arable land. But think, it might go up by a couple of % by 2050, or it might go down by a couple of % by 2050. But basically, it is not going to increase. So we've now got diet changes demanding more protein than dairy. And by the way, I'm sure many of you know more than I do that to produce a kilogram of rice, or to produce a kilogram of beef, is a very, very different equation in terms of the amount of land you need, the amount of water you need, and so on and so forth. So beef is actually probably one of the most intensive in terms of demanding the amount of land and water that's required, probably 10 times as much on average to produce a kilogram of beef as to produce a kilogram of rice or wheat or a typical cereal. Chicken, not too bad. Fish is almost neutral. Pork, not great, and it sort of gets worse from there. So, how about extreme weather? Now, I'm not here to tell you that I believe in climate change or don't believe in climate change. It's an emotional debate. Not going to get into that today. But unusual weather phenomena are the norm today. Let's face it, tornadoes and, some of the weather events. I mean, a mild winter in Calgary, a ridiculous winter they had in eastern Canada and the eastern seaboard if you happen to have to go to New York, which I did a couple of times. It's simply incredible. So there's no doubt whatsoever, some more intense winds, some lower depressions, lower lows and higher highs, scorchingly hot weather and these kinds of things, making conventional agriculture different. Water quality and shortage, and you just have to go to California's Central Valley today and see how much farmland is just for sale, or they're plowing under almond and walnut and other types of orchards that have been there for years. And then we're seeing increasing pesticide and herbicide resistance to conventional pesticides and herbicides. And finally, food spoilage and waste. And I'll come back to that in a minute because it's surprising how big a factor that is. So, more bad news. And these are just a couple of sort of random things. But this actually plots from, again, you won't be able to see easily from the back, but 2004 to 2012. And this is food prices here. So you can see how food prices spike over, this is the total global food price index. You can see how it spiked over that period from 2004 to 2012. Anybody guess what the red lines represent? They represent social unrest. Anything from actual outbreaks of civil war, food riots, and so forth. Well, do we see a correlation there? When people can't feed themselves, they got nothing else to do. Your family is starving. That guy over there has food. There's an AK-47 in that closet. What are you going to do? It's a pretty gut-wrenching sort of decision, but I tell you, all of us would make a certain decision. Let's not talk about it, but that's what happened during these periods. We don't want to see that kind of thing happen. And if we don't want to see that kind of thing happen, this is a totally different issue, but this is 1990 up to about 2011, 2012, and this is Canada's deficit in value-added agricultural products. So yeah, we're known and we do produce primary products, and we've increased our exports of primary products. But let's take an example of, say, lentils. So we grow lots of lentils now in Canada, quite a few lentils in Canada. We sell them to India, where they process them, and we enjoy canned dal that we buy from India. Why? Aren't we capable of value-added agriculture in Canada? We're running a $6.3 billion deficit in 2011, and look at how that is just rocketing down. So we're really not being very innovative. All we can do is farm the same way, and that's maybe overly harsh to the farm sector because there's some very notable exceptions. But we're tending to farm the same way while some of the rest of the world is moving on. So anyway, the conclusion I can come to, if we've got to grow more food on the same amount of land, it's pretty simple. There is only one solution, and that's you've got to rely on ag tech. You've got to increase yields from plants and animals that are grazing or grown on the same amount of land. So let's have a look at, when I'm talking about ag tech, what do I really mean? It's a hard area to define because it is so broad and so large, but let me give you an idea of the kinds of things it can do. So I'm talking about increases in yields of both crops and animals. I'm talking about decreasing water usage by 1,000 different ways. It might be better irrigation technology, or it might be genetically modified plants that actually can tolerate drought more, or beyond GMO, which, it does appear right down in the bottom right-hand corner. I'm not going to go into that in a great amount of detail because there are people in this room who are probably far outdo me in terms of the science there, but I'm talking really about fooling around with the messenger RNA inside plant cells and the RNA itself, and being able to alter certain messaging, feedback loops, do loops, and so on, that make a plant do something, because the plant is designed to survive forever. That's how nature wants it to survive, right? But if we're going to harvest it in 3 months or 6 months, why do we care? Let's make it produce as much oil as it possibly can. and so cut off that feedback loop that says, well, stop producing as much oil because I don't have enough leaves and enough roots to support more and more and more oil growing and being put into those little soybeans that I'm collecting down here. If we're going to harvest that soybean in 3-4 months, just blow as much oil into that soybean as you possibly can. And indeed, what's one of the investee companies in Verdex, a company that is working on exactly this, and has shown that it can increase oil yields in soybean plants by anywhere from 25 to 70% with no other input changes, except messing around with the RNA. Reduce pesticide and fertilizer usage while increasing yields. Increasing nutrient and nutraceutical content of foods and feeds. And I say feeds because, you know, if we feed animals the right thing, you can get better weight gain and, you know, better feed utilization and so on and so forth. And again, another example company would be one we're looking at, which co-produces, it's a variety of corn they've developed that has a certain enzyme that's contained in it. That enzyme helps the digestion and the absorption of that feed by cattle, and so they get faster weight gain. To reduce or eliminate the impacts of weather. Eliminate the impacts of weather, well, that sounds pretty interesting. So how would we do that? I'll show you in a minute. Reduce spoilage and waste. Improve farm management practices. That's just really simply better management of the farms themselves, which is often software as much as anything else, and management itself. Utilizing marginal soils for economically productive purposes. That might include things like biofuels or nutraceutical or pharmacologically active agents that you can grow on plants that might grow in relatively unsuitable soils for foods for human consumption. And then biomass crops for energy, chemicals, and pharmacologicals, again, sort of ties into this one. So a couple of sort of examples that I just threw out there, again, is, well, what does this lead to, and what are the kinds of things that we can talk about now? We can talk about antibiotic-free protein. It is possible. Now, there are antimicrobial and even antifungal agents which are not they're not bactericides per se. And again, we're supporting a company in that area. So, for example, they can eliminate the occurrence of bovine respiratory syndrome in feedlot cattle in a very simple way. And I mentioned beyond GMO. But let's look at some specific examples. And one I mentioned was eliminating the impacts of climate and weather. So how would you eliminate that? Well, you know, I think we all know what grow-ops are, but how about legal grow-ops where we grow stuff like lettuce or tomatoes or, you know, peppers, any of your leafy greens and so on and so forth? Well, inside here, you can produce the same amount of lettuce, and lettuce is a good standard to work by, you know, in order to compare lettuce and lettuce, oranges and oranges, and on apples and oranges, we can use lettuce because it's such a standard crop. So this little device here, which is a 40-foot shipping container, which I'm sure you will recognize, actually has that inside it. And this shipping container can produce the same amount of food in 1 year as 19 acres of California farmland. 19 acres of California farmland. Look at the other things. 1/2000th of the water requirement. Do you think California would love that? Jerry Brown's very interested right now. The city of Las Vegas has its 9 commissioners looking into vertical farming, what's called vertical farming. It's a bit of a misnomer, I think, but that happens to be a name that seems to be used. The produce is, it's obviously 100% fresh because, in fact, this container, this very container here, is sitting in the back of a supermarket. If you've ever been in Boston, gone to the high-end supermarket chain Roche's. This particular container is sitting in the back of Roche's, and Roche's guarantee that your lettuce is 2 hours old when you buy it, right? Now, again, there are plenty of people in this room I know who can tell me how fast nutraceuticals and those kinds of good things and the phytochemicals in foods degrade over time. And if you can produce and give somebody a lettuce in 2 hours, that's got a lot more nutrient value to them than one that's the typical time. So anybody want to hazard a guess at what the average time year-round in North America is when you buy, and that's across all of North America, so you've got to include Winnipeg, and lettuce comes a long way in the winter to get to Winnipeg, and, you know, but across all of North America, can anybody just hazard a guess as to how old the average lettuce is when you buy it ahead of romaine?
48 hours?
How about 11 days? Pretty shocking, isn't it? You think of the nutrient value in romaine lettuce. Yeah, I would have guessed exactly the same. Why can't, you know, look, you truck it up from Mexico or from Salinas Valley.
26.
Yes, exactly. But no, 11 days apparently year round. So, okay, 100% fresh, high quality, organic. I put organic in quotes because it doesn't actually meet the present definitions of organic. Why? Because it's not grown in soil. This is done aeroponically or hydroponically, these systems. This one is, this one's aeroponic by the look of it. So you actually spray a nutrient mix at the weeds, Well, all right, weeds are edible too sometimes. So, and for lettuce, this particular system could do 24 cycles a year. And of course, this is, now the biggest cost of this is not so much labor, but it is actually the HVAC system, depending on where it's placed. But if it's in Toyota, for instance, Saudi Arabia, it'd be the same unit. One's just going to run its AC all the time, the other's going to run its heating system all the time, and it's heavily insulated. But you can grow lettuce, and it's 50 degrees in Riyadh, or minus 50 degrees in Toyota, and you can have fresh lettuce in 2 hours. One of the other minor things about it is that you can site these close to centers of consumption. So imagine, and it doesn't have to be this format. I mean, this is an interesting format that the company came up with this, but there are other people who are looking at actually engineered buildings, 50 to 100,000 square feet, that might supply whole urban areas. This is probably enough to supply a very, very large supermarket, extremely large supermarket. And this one also does dual work as producing leafy herbs as well as basil and things like that. I don't like the idea of buying a building and converting it because you're redoing your engineering. So you want to standardize all the time in this business. And that's one of the things why this is a great technology. Because all you do is you have a module. That module costs $65,000 and goes inside a $2,500 shipping container. Yeah, David.
So Mike, I would guess spoilage would be a huge factor here as well. I mean, 11 days on lettuce, there's a lot of wasting to that as well.
Yeah, but spoilage in here.
No, I mean versus traditional.
Agreed, absolutely. Yeah, so you've got much higher product quality. And so the last thing I was going to mention was just, if you can site this close to your center of consumption, then obviously you're reducing carbon footprint in terms of transporting that product instead of having to bring it all the way from Mexico to Winnipeg in the middle of winter. You can have it in Winnipeg and grow it in Winnipeg all the way through the year. Anyway, enough on that one. Let's go to the other example I've chosen, which is herbicides at sea. Well, that sounds kind of interesting. How is that done? Well, this is a John Deere tractor. I think it is. No, I think it's maybe Ford, actually. I thought it was a John Deere. But it's fitted with CCTV cameras, 2 of them at the front. The CCTV cameras look out the width of the spray bar, herbicide spray bar, about 20 meters, and about 20 meters in front of that spray bar. So they're covering an area of about 400 square meters. And they're connected, the signal from the CCTV cameras is fed to a simple computer that has a vision recognition system on board, software. And it's not dissimilar, in fact, it's based on the system that's developed for bad guys at airports, right? Except you just teach it differently. You say, barley, good, Canada thistle, bad. You know? Sometimes you have to repeat it to the computer a few times because they're a little dumb, but then eventually they get it, and then, you know, the CCTV camera can actually look out that 400 square meters ahead of the spray bar and say, what's the weed density? And it calculates the weed density. And then you can set by altering in the software, gives you a menu choice of at what weed density do you want that herbicide tank to turn on. Obviously, if the weed density is 0, you don't want it to turn on. Do you want it to turn on at 0.5%, you know, to maintain your grain? So a farmer can choose, but this field was actually sprayed, it wasn't that field actually, but it was a field of barley, was sprayed 160 acres, and it was sprayed with a setting of, I think it was 1%, that if the CCTV cameras detected 1% or more weed concentration, they would turn on this herbicide tank. The end result is that only 20% of the herbicide that was used compared to the previous year, when not knowing where the weed was and not really caring, the farmer just sprayed the whole field with herbicide. So, 3 benefits. One of them was obvious. The farmer saved a hell of a lot of money on herbicide. Number 2, the environment loved it. Now, somebody benefits from that, I'm sure. We have to figure out how to monetize that as, you know, venture capitalists, with an underlining under the word capitalist. We are venture capitalists, and we're out to make money. So I haven't figured out how we can make money off that side of it yet, but, you know, that's good. There's nothing wrong with doing some good at the same time. And the third thing is that, again, there will be people in this room who know more about this than I do, but you know, any herbicide, I shouldn't perhaps say any herbicide, but most herbicides actually damage some aspect of plant photosynthesis or some aspect of cell reproduction or whatever it might be. That's how they work. So even though you're spraying them on the barley and the barley doesn't die, the barley doesn't yield as high a yield as it would have done if you hadn't sprayed it. So in fact, and it was only anecdotal, the yield of barley was higher, but might have been higher that year anyway, so it's kind of just a good result as it happened. Let's talk a little bit about the kind of things that are real drivers for ag tech. So one of the really good things is we don't have to invent a lot of this stuff. It's already invented. So biotech, you know, covering such things as seeds and traits, biologicals, you know, all the advances in health and nutrition, devices and diagnostics, and some of the advances in animal health. But those are the areas that it covers. Sustainability, renewables, indoor agriculture, we talked about, water, efficiency, efficiency meaning just, you know, making certain we use resources more effectively. The herbicide maybe would be an example. And then in the high-tech area, all the different trading platforms, drones and robotics, they're not being developed just for agriculture, they're being developed to deliver Amazon parcels to you. So, you know, but those same drones, maybe they can be flying over your field detecting whatever bug is there and dealing with it remedially and so on. And ag tech tools, that they really have advanced exponentially. And I should perhaps say they've advanced in terms of their efficacy exponentially, while their cost has come down exponentially. It's almost a Moore's law phenomena with the tools that we're using in biotech now. I didn't go on the tour today, I have been on the tour before. Maybe there's some new equipment that I should have gone and seen, but gene sequencing I'm not going to really talk about because you're all familiar with that, of how much that's come down. It's just quite dramatic. And so, phenotyping technologies. So before it was really difficult to measure, you know, a plant, you're often interested in how much biomass it's producing. Now there's a company which is actually being supported by some VCs in Europe, and its name just escapes me for a minute, but it's probably a world leader in totally automated. I mean, they've got a machine that's half the size of this room. You basically stick it on the side of your greenhouse, or I'm sorry, your pot room. It goes in, it picks out the pot, it brings that pot in, it photographs it under 3 different infrared and ultraviolet maybe, and visible light or something like this. And from that, it can quantify all sorts of things like photosynthetic capability of the plant, biomass content of the plant, and so on and so forth, and change from last time, and everyone is labeled. So there's a massive amount of data, and then it returns the pot to the same place, and it gets all the right amount of nutrient that it's supposed to get, and so on and so forth. So there's a massive amount of data that comes out of this, but this is all around phenotyping technologies, computational biology, and you know, I'm going to sort of jump quickly as well to synthetic biology. I look at computational biology as more using computers to talk about algorithms and relationships into biological systems. So when you go to San Diego, which to me is the hotbed of ag tech in the world, although the interesting thing about ag tech is there are centers all over the world which have got some very interesting ag tech developments. And so we see our funders being very global in that respect. But when you go to some of these companies and there's one we are invested in, as I mentioned, which is doing the work with the actually altering messaging, what you see is guys working on computers. You don't see greenhouses and you don't see a bunch of fields. You see computers. Why? Because they can do a lot of the work computationally beforehand. You know, think how long it took to get a hybrid seed, new hybrid variety. You know, if you had to pollinate this one and that one, and then go out in the field and the harvest, do and repeat, sort of several times until you got something that worked. And so it typically could take, what, 15 years to get a hybrid? It might take more than that. Now there's no reason why you can't do that in 2 or 3 years. So that has enormous advantages. Not only is it good from a technology point of view, it's good from a venture capital point of view, because we can get our money back sooner. If we get our money back sooner, we get a higher IRR, internal rate of return. So a higher use of our money. So our investors love us, so they put more money in. So you guys have more money from us to invent more stuff. So isn't it a beautiful cycle? It just goes round and round and round. Synthetic biology, I'm not going to spend time on. So, you know, yeah, you really can accelerate growth in ag tech now. So, for a start, just simply the amount of money going into ag tech has gone up by over 10-fold in the last 10 years. And the use of ag tech has gone up enormously. We're seeing over 500 million acres of biotech traits planted in the world today. And, you know, whether you're GMO or non-GMO, again, to me, it's like climate change. It's an emotional debate, so not worth having. I really think that people just don't talk about the science. They have a preformed opinion when they come into a GMO debate, and they leave with the same opinion. It's just not worth having the dialogue. But the point is, whether you're pro-GMO, anti-GMO, or neutral, you know, there are technologies that are going to replace GMO in the next 20 years anyway. But GMO is a very accepted product today. And one of the interesting things I found is, I don't know if any of you have been down to the States recently or seen the advertisements by Chipotle, I'm sure you know the restaurant chain Chipotle down there. Well, so on the windows now of all of them, it says, ban GMOs or non-GMO. This property, you know, we don't use GMOs anymore. You know, it's just marketing. We were talking about marketing earlier. I have to tell you, it is complete BS, because, you know, they don't use GMO corn to make the tortillas and the enchilada covers, right? But if you buy a soda in there, where did the high fructose corn syrup come from, right? You eat any meat in there, what was that animal fed on? What was the feed? I can tell you, it was GMO feed. And all of the other ingredients that are in that restaurant are absolutely GMO based. Do you know there's over $20 billion worth of public R&D in the ag area in North America? And so there's a huge amount of information that we're not very effective at capitalizing. The US, as always, is better than we are, but we aim to change that, and that's part of the purpose of Verdex and AVAC's mandate over the next little while. But development costs are lower for this kind of thing for the two reasons I talked about. Time to market, I've already talked about to some extent. These toolkits can speed the lab work and lower regulatory hurdles. We're seeing, you know, there's a very big split between what's required for human consumption versus, you know, some of the things we can use on plants these days. And then finally, we can be more profitable. So, really, it's better for venture capitalists, so we can attract more money. And this is perhaps an interesting example of this. Sorry if this is a little difficult to read there, but these are some real companies. One which has a somewhat similar name to the gracious lady who introduced me. But let me start with Mycogen, because probably quite a few of you know Mycogen. It was actually bought by Dow, developed, the CEO really was Jerry Calder, who was actually a partner in our fund, an emeritus partner. He comes into the office and contributes when he's not playing golf. But Jerry's 72, and Jerry really put this company on its feet and was responsible for the last tranche, which was sold to Dow for 1.2 at a valuation of $1.2 billion. And if it tells me AgTech's not lucrative, I can point to things like this, and I've got one slide coming up, we will end the thing, that'll show you some other valuations. But that company took 13 years from inception to the time of the exit, right? And it took a hell of a lot of money. It was something like $50 million, $60 million of invested capital. Now you can see there's a good return on investment, but I mean, that's one of the successes that venture capitalists like to have, because we have our failures as well, sometimes. Phoenix is another company from inside our group. It's not a Verdex company. This is our partners in the US, Finisterre. They grew that company in 8 years at a cost somewhere in the region of about I think it was more like, about $22 million of investment that went into the Phoenix. Most of it in fairly late. Maybe it was even close to 30. I think it was close to 30. But it was sold for $400 million. That company had 0 revenues. 0 when it was sold for $400 million. Why? It had 276 patents. It had regulatory approval from every regulatory agency you could possibly think of, and everything it needed. All it needed was a sales force. It had done field trials on fields a lot bigger than I can see out this window. So it was absolutely, the products were completely ready to go to market. And Bayer came along and said, well, we've got 2,500 people. And Phoenix said, why would we need to hire a sales force of 2,500? It'll cost us huge amounts of money and take us forever. So we'll sell it to you, $400 million. Done. Well, and Bayer are so happy, they're now an investor, one of the lead founding investors in our new fund. And now we're talking about, this is a company I mentioned, it's actually called ZCal. We've got another company called High Frequency Genomics, and so on and so forth. And these kinds of companies, we expect actually to exit in literally in 3-4 years because of things like computational biology and synthetic biology, with the same kind of exit values that we've seen before, and less money going in. So that makes the business more profitable for us, so we love it too. I told you I'd show you some success stories. I'm sure many of you heard about the purchase of Climate Corp by Monsanto for roughly $1 billion. Its revenues are unknown, but they were probably less than $50 million at the time of sale. Monsanto buying basically a climate company, climate prediction company, started by 2 ex-Google employees and a guy from China, I think. Phoenix to Bayer Crop Sciences, I just mentioned that. The ones in red, by the way, are ones that are attributable to partners in the FP2 fund, which is the new AgTech fund we're raising. AgriQuest to Bayer Crop Sciences for about $500 million, revenues were about 50. DevGen to Syngenta for $523 million, less than $40 million in revenues. Some of these names will mean something to you, some of them maybe not. Mycogen, I mentioned that one. Pasturia, this is the nematode company, Syngenta. Total payment will be about $115 million if Syngenta complete that purchase. It has no revenues at all. And by the way, this is a very, very high cost way of getting rid of nematodes, and there are some, we're actually looking at a company based of all places in Vancouver that has some very, very interesting both insecticidal and antifungal technology, naturally based, an extract of a plant, but their expertise is really in how do you formulate and stabilize this. So one thing I've got to say here, this is sort of getting close to the end, but if you're working in the space or you're interested in the space, think about what the farmer needs. Think about your customer. I know that sounds terribly trite, but an awful lot of people, pursue, particularly this is true of things like biologically active agents, which are used as control agents as pesticides particularly. Right? That's great. But if it means the farmer has to buy a brand new $2 million piece of equipment and has to do a separate application at a separate time of year, your company is almost certainly not going to be successful. Whereas if you can take whatever it is that you've got and just take it in the bottle and pour it into his mixed tank like he does every spring, and go out and drive around and spray it on along with everything else, then great, you've got a success. So think about formulation and practicality, pragmatism, and how do you apply some of these things. And finally, so I think this is going to be a challenge for Syngenta with this one. It's great for really specialty users, like it was used on the Masters golf greens, for those of you who are golfers, to get rid of nematodes back around with BASF for about $1 billion. So you can see that those valuations are really up there with some of the things you see Google and others buying these days. The unashamedly promotional part of this is now the fund that we're in the middle of raising. It's pure ag tech. We won't invest in land. It's a joint fund between what we regard, immodestly, as the top US and the top Canadian ag tech GPs. So we have over 100 years of experience between us, and a total of 3 funds, which on average have returned about 2.7 times the money over their time, which is about twice the average by the way, for venture capital returns over the last 10 years or so. The fund size is about 200 million, we're targeting 150. We completed the first close in January for a little under 50 million. So that means we are now operational. We are a fund. And the final close will come late this year. Minimum unit size is $5 million for those of you who really want to play at the small end of it. But I know most of you got more than $5 million to play with, so we're expecting bigger unit size than that. The good thing about it is we've had commitments from Bayer Crop Sciences, as I say, and one of the top 3 global food companies, food and beverage companies, and it's not Coca-Cola, so it's probably pretty hard for you to get service, but I'm not allowed to say. We've also got interest from sovereign wealth funds, and actually a commitment very likely within 2 weeks from one of the biggest sovereign wealth funds in the world for this. So the point I'm trying to make from just actually putting this up at all, apart from getting you to put money in the collection plate at the end, is that it's actually interesting who's investing in this. And it's sadly, again, Canadians yet, although we're going to be talking to some Canadians, have already, we're going to be talking to them again soon. And it's often people from different parts of the world now. And so I'll finish with the comment that although we have a North American focus, and ag tech is going to really come from here, from North America, some of the best ag tech in the world is being developed here. There are also places like Israel where it's coming from, and New Zealand and Australia where there's some amazing ag tech being developed. But deployment could happen anywhere. It could happen in Africa, it could happen in China, it could happen in India or Pakistan, or right here in North America, or right here in Canada as opposed to south of the border. Different technologies are going to apply more or less, greater or lesser extents to those. So, I always like simple conclusions, and so there's my simple conclusion. Go for ag tech. We as the greedy venture capitalists make lots of money. Everybody can eat to heart's content, and the world is going to be a happy place. So that's another good news story. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very interesting and thought-provoking talk. And I think that, imagine there's some questions and perhaps some discussion from the group. Go ahead.
I'm curious why in 10 years we've only gone up 10%. It seems to be very low. If you look at other IT companies and whatever, certainly it's been a little higher than a 10% increase in investment in 10 years.
No, that was a tenfold increase.
Tenfold.
Yes, tenfold.
Tenfold.
So I can tell you, in fact, so there was about 100 million in 2005. There was about $100 million, according to those who collect, people like PitchBook and Preqin and so on. Thomson Reuters have a database, collect venture capital investment statistics.
How does it compare to IT though? I mean, it's just
tiny then.
Yeah. And it's the food
but
that we eat. So
right. Well, you see, it's not proven. It's not a proven. It's one of those sad situations where, quite honestly, LP investors. I would never say this if you were a group of LP investors, but they are rather like lemmings. So that's why you do a first close on a fund, is because now we can go out and we say, well, Barron are investors in the fund, and we're allowed to tell qualified investors who it is. So you're now all qualified investors. So that's why you have to put in your minimum 5 million. So okay, so we can go out and say that now. And then other people say, well, Bayer's in, there must be something going on here. And then they listen to the story more closely, and then, they're in. And then it just gets a momentum of their own. And often these funds are then oversubscribed. We're seeing ag tech funds, ag funds, I should say. Now, more of them are land funds than timber funds these days. Some huge land and timber funds, particularly for places like Indonesia, Southeast Asia, Brazil, and so on. Just getting oversubscribed incredibly. But to give you an idea of how rapidly this is accelerating, Q1 of 2015, the statistics are collected by a group now. It's much easier to collect the statistics by a group called AgFunder out of New York, which is a crowdfunding tool for ag tech. Unbelievable. I thought the guy would fail, and he's doing amazingly well. But anyway, Q1 of 2015, there was more money put into ag tech than there was in the whole of 2014. So, and that was something like $2 billion. And you're seeing guys like Eric Schmidt, a Google founder, get involved in this and putting serious behind it. Kleiner Perkins is trying to recruit people in this game. Vantage Point, these names might not mean very much, but they're some of the key top Silicon Valley venture capital groups now.
So Andreas, the IT guys are taking their money and realizing that agri is a better investment.
Well, maybe not better, but it's a great bet to make because they see the macroeconomic drivers.
So over the next 20 years, what do you see as the biggest driver to some novel production technologies? Is it that modular low water? Is water going to be the big thing for guys in California? Are they going to drive that kind of stuff? I mean, because it's not really. I'm sure the urgency isn't quite here yet. Well, urgency maybe on the but I was thinking there's more urgency in California for it. It's all in the news now. How urgent is it? I don't know.
Yeah. It's going to be a combination of factors because we actually made I've used that as an example. We've actually made, for the time being, a decision to stand on the sidelines of vertical farming, not because it's not a great technology, but as a venture capital investor, there's very little protectable IP. And so we just can't see who's going to be the winner or winners. There are probably going to be 2 or 3. But it's very hard to pick because there are 30 companies out there. I visited 20 of them. Everything from something that looks like a wine fridge you can buy and you can stick in your house. And you can grow your own lettuce and herbs and so on right there next door to your refrigerator. And you can go in. Pretty neat. Pretty interesting company. My first thought was, that doesn't make sense. And then I thought, you know what? There are enough people who go and buy, Sub-Zero appliances and Viking appliances and so on and so forth. These things aren't that expensive. They're no more than a big wine fridge, and that's all it is.
So you think some of this novel fresh food issue might be a driver too, as opposed to?
Well, I think they might well be. I think you're seeing more people caring about what they're eating. They're asking questions, particularly the generation with kids, you know, the 25 to sort of 40-year-old, very concerned about what they're eating and their kids are eating, even more than what they're eating. So I think that's a driver. But yeah, look, I just saw a projection today to say planting in, I think it was the US Midwest or whatever, is going to be down this year for corn and slightly up for something else, you know, and overall food prices are likely to be down. But that's a year-to-year statistical kind of aberration that you're bound to live with. Overall, the trend in food price has to be up just because of those two fundamentals of more mouths to feed and more demand of the kind of land-intensive and water-intensive food crops or food types that are being demanded, and you know, those two can't be reconciled. So there's good news and bad news on that front. The good news is that, as I hope I've shown you today, the technologies are there. They need a lot more investment. They need commercialization. They need deployment above all, probably. Deployment above all. So the technology is there, I believe, to avoid any kind of catastrophe in 2050. But it doesn't just happen in 2050. You know, 2025 is going to be a challenge. 2030 is going to be a challenge. There's another way that I've heard this put, is that the world is going to have to produce more food between now and 2050 than it's ever produced in the entire history of man. Otherwise, we're going to have hungry people, and I showed you results of what happens when we have hungry people. Not something you want to think about.
I have a question more about general venture capital. I've seen a couple quotes recently from the Canadian Venture Capital Association saying that deals in Alberta represent 3% of all venture capital deals in Canada. And in 2015, in the first quarter of 2015, the total value of all the deals in Canada or in Alberta was like $2 million. I don't know if that number sounds right to you, or maybe any comment on why the number is so low relative to other provinces.
The number sounds low, but it is low in Alberta, and I think it's partly low because we've got an oil industry here which is so dominant, and the statistics that are collected are often misleading. So there's a huge amount of just closed loop angel financing within the oil patch. So almost all the service companies were funded by people who made money producing oil and gas, and they just went in whenever, you know, some guy came to them and said, "Oh, I can invent a drill rig, or I can invent a better bit, or, you know, I can do this horizontal drilling or a directional tool," or whatever it might be. Well, these guys made a lot of money in the oil patch. They would write checks. So there's a hell of a lot that goes on in the informal sense, and none of that's collected. Alberta, having had the government that it's had for 44 years, and I thought I'd wear this color tie just to indicate that things have changed a little in the province lately. I picked it out especially this morning because I was coming to Edmonton. The government's never really had policies that encourage the formation of venture capital in this province. There have been some notable exceptions. AEC, Alberta Enterprise Corporation, which has put money into now, I think, 7 or 8 funder funds, including the Accelerate Fund, which is a fund we manage. That's an angel investment fund, generally across all technology spaces. They have not put any money into ag tech. And sadly, I don't think we will see money out of Alberta. And I don't think it's necessarily government's role to fund us, but I don't think, you know, we're more likely to get money from BC IMC, which is the kind of sovereign wealth fund out of BC, than we are out of AIMCO. That's pretty sad when you think about it, really. We're more likely to get money out of Saskatchewan than we are out of Alberta. I don't know why. don't really have a good answer for that. But there are venture capital companies in the province, but the province has tended to also throttle them from time to time. So I don't know. Sorry, I don't mean this the way it sounds. I don't know if you're old enough to remember VenCap and its demise. So VenCap was a provincial initiative, and that was capitalized at $200 million from the Heritage Fund and a share issue at the same time. And shareholders made good money on VenCap, and they were doing very well. But, you know, the politicians kind of, I gotta be careful too. But, you know, as I said to somebody else in the room, look, I'm older than I look. And so I don't really mind too much about making outrageous and controversial statements, because what the hell, you shake things up a bit, you've got to change things, you've got to make some things happen. And, you know, I'd like to see them happen. And so, you know, the fact is that government like to control money. And sadly, it tends to be the more left-wing you become, the more socialist you become, the more you have this sort of control kind of mentality. But even conservative governments like to control the money that they have, that they receive. And that's not necessarily a good way to encourage free enterprise at all. If you fundamentally believe in a free enterprise system, you should get the money out in a free enterprise system, because that's the thing that produces the jobs, that produces the taxes, that can feed the money back into university research grants and student support and all those other good things which are great, but which can't go on unless you have a tax base. But that's a whole nother lecture for another day.
I'd like, by the way, I'm old enough to remember the VenCap start and finish and all, the whole enchilada and the politics that surrounded that particular exit. But that wasn't what I wanted to talk about. I'd just like to draw on your unique perspective. You sit at the top of the heap and you see the global trends, and that was the focus of your presentation, and it's fabulous. But taking that expertise and then applying it down to where we live, to Alberta, and say, given the realities, our demographics, our geographic location, our history, our educational system, our agricultural sector as it's developed to this particular point, where within that, all of that blend, do you think the primary opportunities are for entrepreneurs to say, I want to take advantage of what we have uniquely to Alberta in order to penetrate this larger ag tech kind of market and sector?
Right. Good question. I mean, I do think it's important to say, yes, what can I do here in Alberta that applies to Alberta, because then I can check it and test it and do all my other good things in my own backyard. But I want to look for a deployment opportunity that's a lot broader than Alberta. And I certainly would need to see that to fund a company. If I don't see that it could be deployed across the prairies and therefore across Ukraine, Poland, you know, Russia, maybe China, I'm going to have limited interest. Because, you know, again, it's important for all of you to realize AVAC has changed in that it is moving to become an entirely private sector company. You got to think of it now. It never has been a crown corporation. It's a misnomer to think that it's an agency. It's not. It never has been. It's been an independent private company all its life. It may surprise you, but it has. And now it's totally private and will operate as such. So we're in it to make money, but we're in it to make money for the good reasons that I said. And I think that now the good news is, although it's a private company, it's a Part 9 corporation, which means it's not for profit, which means all the profits get plowed back into the same purpose. And we cannot, there aren't any shareholders to the company, so I cannot go and pick that company's pockets and say I own 40% of it or 50% of it. I get carried interest, which means that I can benefit. If I make a lot of money for the company, I'm going to make a lot of money. That's not unfair. But, you know, we don't just have a bunch of shareholders who, so there's nothing wrong with shareholders either, because they have to get rich, you know, in a normal corporate structure, but nobody put that money in, the government did, so that's why it's preserved for the government. But that's getting a bit technical there. Let me get back to your question and say, you know, I think some of the opportunities are around the businesses that we know best. So what is that? Cool, temperate crop in dry farming, generally. Dry farming. Now, as you head north and west, it's a little different. But, you know, think of some of the things that you could bring into southeastern Alberta. Think of some of the things that are being done there, but how could we improve on that? What are the challenges that those farmers face in southeastern Alberta? Is it around water? In which case, somebody got some bright idea of better ways of irrigation. You know, maybe not a great thing to look at, irrigation, because the Israelis are a long way ahead of us. They got such a challenge. So little water, so little land, and so on and so forth. So I think it's, you know, it's focused on your core strengths, but think globally in terms of your market. Because if you don't have a global market, I think you've got a problem.
Understand. Quick question. What's the ROI that you look for on your investment?
Well, look for, I mean, meaning you hope to get?
What's sort of the equity position that you take? What's the share of the company that you expect?
It totally varies. I mean, it depends on the level of risk. So if we got in really early, we might want as much as 40% of a company for as little as $1 million. But that means because it's very high risk and you haven't got very far. And, you know, but we're willing to do some of those deals. At the same time, we'll balance off what's called a typical Series A or even a B round or a C round. We'll do those. But that's usually in syndicate with, you know, a couple of other ag tech VCs who we feel very comfortable with, maybe, you know, Era Capital, which is the old Rainbow Bank group out of Holland, exactly, or Cultian, or even now there's a group in Montreal, Cycle Capital, are starting. They're a clean tech fund, but now they're starting to do some ag investments as well. Or Kleiner Perkins, hey, they've made 2 ag investments, you know. The bastions of Silicon Valley now, Andreessen Horowitz, I was mentioning Alloy, Vantage Point Capital, all these guys, they're all, Kostler, you know, they're all starting to dip their toes in the water of ag tech. So that's got to tell you something as well. If they're trying it, and they're the big guys, it's time to go. And speaking of time to go, there is another question.
Sorry, just one more.
That's okay.
Great. Because you talked about sort of the investment and the market scope that one would be looking for. I'm wondering more about international cooperation on the research and technology development level. Do the companies you work with do a lot of that?
Yes, and in fact, okay, so one of our partners is, well, if I give you his name, for the first drink of wine, which I believe comes soon after this, somebody's got to tell me his ethnic origin. His name is Arama Kukutai. 1, 2, 3, you get 10, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
From New Zealand?
10.
Is he from New
He's
Zealand?
Maori from
Maori,
New Zealand.
Really?
Very close. Yeah. So, I mean, he happened to be born and raised in New Zealand. He's lived in the States almost his entire life. You might see some, you know, Maori heritage in his looks, but I mean, the guy's got degrees and experience like you wouldn't believe. Another partner is from Melbourne, Australia, via the UK, and then Stanford, and now runs the Palo Alto office. You know, well, I've always said I'm half British, half American, half Chinese, and what was another one? There's another half something else. Ended up with about 5 halves. Oh, half Canadian, of course, and I think it's half French. No, Scottish, because my mother was Scottish. She'd kill me if I had forgotten that one. So, you know, I'm one of these crazy mixed up people too. So yes, from the point of view of cooperation, absolutely. That's why we have partner funds, 2 in Israel, 1 in Holland, 1 in Australia, and 1 in New Zealand right now. And we're talking to 1 from India, Omnivore Ventures out of India. Because ag innovation is broader I think then, let's face it, so much of the internet media type of stuff and even hardware and software before that was in Silicon Valley. It really was, or Route 128. And there were little pockets elsewhere, but not a whole hell of a lot. And people have tried to emulate it and simulate it and do it in their neck of the woods. And I'm not saying there haven't been successes of some big companies that have grown outside that. But with AgTech, I think it can be different. So we are very much looking, in fact, we like the idea of teams that have exposure to different places and can trial stuff in different places, because, something that might work in a cold, temperate climate, relatively dry, might not work here, but it might be absolutely fantastic for agriculture in India. And therefore, that's not a small market. That's worth a few billion. We could exploit that well.
Can I just ask a very question for last question? So, AVAC and traditional, I know we all benefit so much in Alberta, and as we see, lots of entrepreneurs and also some of the companies. It's early stage, we're technology focused. So, and then big challenge for us because we really don't have much venture capital funding. Access to capital is always the biggest funding for our whole bio, tech industry and life science. So, with the new government, did you see any opportunity? I think AVAC is such a good vehicle and good set of particular funds, at that time to help in this sort of a early stage in the company. Do you see there's any more opportunity in the future? I understand the current situation with this great opportunity you have built and Verdex, but do you think there's any opportunity if there's, with the new government and this is harder to create another funds. AVAC is already there. Do you think if there's any opportunity you can expand that?
I'd love that support. I'd love to find anybody who knows anybody who's anybody in the NDP party, because I'll be very honest with you. Look, I've supported generally, and it's not surprising, big business has supported the Conservatives. But look, I can't say I was that shocked, or in the end even that sorry to wake up the next morning and find out that, I would need to wear an orange tie in Edmonton. And the reason I say that is, and Jackie and I and others were talking earlier on a little bit about this, is that, Norway saved $1 trillion of its oil revenues. We've got 16 billion in the Heritage Trust Fund, and it's going down. And do you see better roads? So what's happened to that money? We have had lower taxes. And look, I'm not here to make a political speech, but I think the province does need a shake-up. It needs a wake-up call. And maybe, Jackie, that's exactly the kind of thing that, if we can find the right access points, we can do, is go in and say, look, because the Premier-elect talked about small business specifically in her acceptance speech. She said that small business is very important and it's going to be a focus of my government. And I think she'll lead a centrist government, because she's got to have advice that says, try and do a Bob Ray and you're dead. So, she's got to lead a centrist sort of government. Somebody said to me, and I've heard this from a number of sources now, and I agree with it totally, that the Alberta NDP has to look somewhat like the PC Liberal Party, centrist, as I say. But absolutely, look, if we can find ways of working together as the biotech community and say, look, it's an ecosystem. If we don't have money to invest in venture capital, as venture capital in companies and have successes with those companies, then we can't create those jobs and those taxes that, as I say, feed back into the government coffers in terms of the ability to support a facility like this, which is great, which people need, because this is where ideas that then we can begin to support come from. And from entrepreneurs out there sitting in their farm shed, and all of a sudden somebody says, I got it. Why didn't I this?
So we should work together, Alberta and AVAC, to see whether we have a good opportunity for the economic diversification, right? That's another thing she was talking about.
Absolutely.
I think we have a heck of an opportunity. They need advice, support,
They showed it.
We're proactive in reaching out to them.
Yeah, that's the only thing, one of the key things can help and really power, this sector and then more innovation. So, right, with capital, like capital, we've been struggling.
And I think, and I'm sorry if this sounds self-centered, but one of the key messages that also has to get across is that the way to drive innovation is not to allocate more money within government to do it. It has to get out into entrepreneurs' hands.
Yeah,
And that's,
we've been talking about that.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of money invested in building policy infrastructures
Right.
in the government.
Right.
But, very little money actually get into entrepreneurs and business, the technology commercialization.
Exactly. Yeah. Agreed.
I think we're losing a lot of technologies. A lot of good things have come out of Alberta and they're actually being commercialized outside of Alberta.
So you remember the company I told you about at Phoenix that was exited for $400 million? 400? $400 million with zero revenues. That came out of PBI in Saskatoon. About 80% of the technology that was in that company came out of PBI. So, and there are many other examples. This country, actually, is a wonderful agricultural example of that. We are very good at sowing seeds. We're very good at fertilizing. We're very good at watering. And just when that nice little head of corn is, or wheat or whatever it is just about perfect, we say, oh, what to do with that? And somebody from South Korea or south of the border or somewhere else comes along and goes, and combines the whole thing, and then sells it back to us for about 3 times the price. Welcome to Canada, And I don't know why we've got that history. Oh, I can give you one reason. This is personally just my own personal thoughts. But life has actually almost been too good here. This country is so incredibly rich in natural resources that we can live and continue to live just by pumping out those natural resources and selling them. And let's face it, there's still an awful lot of BMWs on the road, and I don't see a shortage of people eating steak in the steakhouses around town. So what's it going to take to get to the point where we need to say, we actually need to work hard? There are people out there, because I know Jackie travels a huge amount. I travel actually less this year, less last year. I was down to 200,000 miles last year. My average is usually about 250,000 miles a year. That's Asia, it's all over. And I've seen poverty like you wouldn't believe, and you see people working like crazy. Indonesia, Myanmar, and quite honestly, there are hard workers here, but there aren't an awful lot of them. Life is too easy. And until, I mean, in some ways, I hope we don't get a big shock. But something we have to realize that just going on being a primary producer from the incredible wealth of resources we have, whether it's water, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's, agricultural land, trees, you name it, we've got it, diamonds, gold, da-da-da-da-da-da. We are so lucky in Canada. We shouldn't go on squandering it, and we have been for a long time. I'm getting awfully philosophical, and I like this kind of stuff. Maybe I should have been a politician.
Any other questions? Not, then I'll just to my pitch that I think we do have an opportunity as an industry during the change is an opportunity to have the renewed discussion about what it is that the industry needs, and as an association we are starting to have those renewed conversations with our industry and make sure that we can articulate properly what it is that are those key things that are needed to spur some of that growth. So we look forward to hearing from us, and also one more pitch in terms of the companies and passing on to please do your state of the industry, or if you're working with some of the SMEs, do get them to fill out those surveys, because that's important data that goes into advocating for the industry as well. And again, a big thank you to Dr. Raymont for a wonderful talk, and to you for coming out join us and continue those conversations in a less formal setting and network with each other. Thank you to our title sponsor, Norton Rose.
I just have some housekeeping and some requests. So the doors outside, if you go out, bring a buddy or ring the doorbell because it will lock behind you. The other thing is I request that because we have to do a turnaround for the reception in this same room, if you could have a technology or bathroom break in the break room over there. Please everyone take a 5-minute break outside while we turn the room around and turn around. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
It's a good one, right?